Titan's gate hung in space like a wound in reality, a region where stellar winds and gravitational anomalies created a corridor of stable space surrounded by death. Ships that tried to go around the gate found themselves torn apart by forces that human science still couldn't fully explain. The Kreth fleet would have to come through this narrow passage, and that was where Jake planned to make them pay for every meter they advanced. The human and allied fleet looked pathetically small against the backdrop of the gate's swirling energies. 7 ships total: the Defiance, 4 human destroyers that Admiral Cole had scraped together from border patrols, and the allied vessels from the Talreen and Vorn. Against them would come 500 Kreth warships, the largest battle fleet assembled in recorded galactic history. The odds were so bad that Jake's tactical computer had crashed twice trying to calculate survival probabilities. Lisa stood at her station and coordinated the defensive positions with an efficiency that Jake had come to rely on absolutely. She had placed the ships in a staggered formation that would allow them to concentrate fire while covering each other's weak points. It was brilliant work, but they both knew it wouldn't be enough. When the Kreth came through that gate, mathematics said they would crush the defenders in less than 20 minutes. Captain Morrison, transmission coming in from the Kreth fleet. They are asking us to surrender. Jake looked at the tactical display showing the massive enemy force gathering on the other side of the gate, waiting to pour through the moment they received his answer. He could see Admiral Cole on the communication screen from her flagship, her face set in grim determination. The other captains watched and waited for his response. Open the channel. Let's hear what they have to say. The view screen changed to show Supreme Commander Voth, and Jake was struck by how different the Kreth commander looked from Ambassador Vale. Where Vale had been confident and arrogant, Voth's expression showed something else. Was it respect, fear? Maybe both. Captain Morrison, I have studied your species extensively. I understand that you do not surrender easily. But please listen to logic one time. I have 500 ships. You have 7. If you fight, you will die and accomplish nothing. Surrender now, and I give you my word that your crews will be treated well. This is not the time for human stubbornness. Jake felt every eye on the bridge turn to him. In his peripheral vision, he could see Kevin at the helm, Danny's status updates scrolling across engineering displays, Helen in her station monitoring the Allied ships. These people trusted him to make the right call, even though there was no right call in a situation like this. Commander Voth, I appreciate the offer. I really do. But I need you to understand something about humans. We know the odds are terrible. We know we are probably going to die here today. But we also know that if we let you through this gate unopposed, you will reach human colonies where millions of people are sleeping safely in their beds, thinking that someone is out here protecting them. Those people are why we fight. Not because we think we can win, but because someone has to stand in your way. Voth's expression changed, and Jake recognized the look now. It was the face of someone who had hoped to avoid violence but knew it was inevitable. The Kreth commander nodded slowly. I thought you would say something like that. I wanted to offer mercy because my study of human history has taught me that your species produces remarkable individuals when faced with destruction. You are one of those individuals, Captain Morrison. I regret that I must kill you. The transmission ended, and the tactical display erupted with red icons as the Kreth fleet began moving through Titan's gate. They came in waves, organized and precise, their formation designed to overwhelm defensive positions through pure weight of numbers. Jake watched the first wave of 50 ships clear the gate and spread out in attack formation. All ships open fire. Make every shot count. The human and allied vessels unleashed everything they had at the advancing Kreth. Plasma bolts and missiles filled the space between the two fleets, and for a few glorious seconds it looked like they might actually hurt the enemy. 3 Kreth ships took critical damage and fell out of formation. Then the return fire began, and Jake's hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Shields at 50% and dropping. Multiple hull breaches reported across all decks. Lisa's voice was steady, but Jake could hear the strain underneath. The view screen showed the Talreen ship taking heavy damage, its crystalline hull shattering under concentrated fire. One of the human destroyers exploded in a ball of superheated plasma, taking 17 brave souls with it. The Kreth kept coming, wave after wave of ships pouring through the gate. Danny's voice crackled over the communication system, barely audible over the sound of explosions and failing systems. Captain, I have an idea, but it is insane even by our standards. You know that stellar phenomenon that makes the gate necessary? What if we collapse it? Not permanently, but enough to close the gate for a few hours and trap half the Kreth fleet on the other side? Jake's mind raced through the implications. If they could collapse the phenomenon even temporarily, it would cut the enemy force in half and buy time for Admiral Cole's reinforcements to arrive. But collapsing something that massive would require channeling their entire power output into the gate's edge, which meant dropping their shields at the worst possible moment. Do it. Lisa, coordinate with the remaining ships. We need to cover each other while we are vulnerable. Kevin, get us into position near the gate's aperture. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency despite the chaos around them. The Defiance limped toward the edge of the gate, trailing atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. The remaining Allied ships formed up around them, taking hits meant for the human battleship. Jake watched a Vorn vessel sacrifice itself to block a barrage that would have destroyed the Defiance's engineering section. All power to the forward particle beam. Lisa, I need targeting coordinates for the gate's most unstable point. She worked her console with bleeding hands, having been thrown against her station when a near miss had rattled the bridge. When she looked up at him, there was something fierce in her eyes that made Jake proud to have her as his tactical officer. Coordinates locked. Captain, if this works, we will be caught in the blast wave. Our shields are already gone. This will probably kill us. Probably isn't definitely. Fire. The Defiance's experimental particle beam lanced out at full power, striking the edge of Titan's gate with enough energy to ignite a small star. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the stellar phenomenon began to collapse inward, reality folding in on itself as the stable corridor became unstable. The Kreth ships still in the gate found themselves caught in gravitational shears that tore them apart. 200 warships on the far side of the gate watched helplessly as their path forward vanished. The blast wave hit the Defiance like the fist of an angry god. Jake felt the deck plates buckle under his feet and the view screen shattered into fragments. The entire ship tumbled end over end through space, systems failing across every deck. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Danny shouting that they had lost main power and Kevin reporting that helm control was gone. They were drifting helplessly, but somehow they were still alive. The remaining Kreth ships in their space numbered just under 250 now, and Jake could see them regrouping for another assault. But something had changed. He could see it in the way they moved, in the hesitation before they advanced. They had just watched humans do something that should have killed them, and survive anyway. They had watched their own fleet cut in half by an enemy that refused to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. Admiral Cole's reinforcements chose that moment to arrive. 30 human warships dropping out of faster-than-light travel with weapons already firing. The Kreth found themselves facing a fresh enemy fleet, while still reeling from what the defenders had done. On the view screen, which someone had managed to restore, Jake saw Voth's flagship pull back from the fighting. The transmission came through on all frequencies. Voth's voice tired and somehow older than it had been an hour before. Human fleet Kreth forces are withdrawing. We acknowledge that this battle cannot be won at acceptable cost. We request negotiation for ceasefire terms. Jake slumped in his damaged chair and felt the weight of the last hour crash down on him. They had won, not through superior numbers or better technology, but through the simple refusal to quit when any sane species would have surrendered. Around him, the bridge crew was silent, too exhausted to celebrate. The war wasn't over, but something had changed in the galaxy. The Kreth had retreated, had admitted defeat, had done something they hadn't done in 3,000 years. And every species watching on their sensors and listening to their communications would know that humanity had forced that retreat. The age of Kreth dominance was over, ended not by a superior empire, but by a handful of humans who didn't know how to give up. Jake accepted Voth's request for negotiations, and then closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them again, Lisa was standing beside his chair with a damage report that would probably take months to fix. But they were alive, and they had held the gate, and that was enough. The galaxy had learned what fear really meant, and humanity had taught them. The Defiance emerged from faster-than-light travel near Talreen Prime, and Jake immediately understood why this species had surrendered to the Kreth, despite having superior technology. The planet below was beautiful beyond description, covered in crystalline cities that caught the light of their sun and threw it back in rainbow patterns. Orbital platforms hung in perfect geometric arrangements, each one a marvel of engineering. Everything about Talrine civilization spoke of a people who had spent millennia perfecting rather than fighting. Ambassador Nira came aboard the Defiance within an hour of their arrival, and she was unlike any alien Jake had ever imagined. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her body covered in scales that shifted through shades of blue and green as she moved. Her eyes were large and expressive, and when she spoke through the translator, her voice carried a musical quality that made even bad news sound pleasant. Captain Morrison, my people have waited 200 years for someone to show us that the Kreth could be challenged. We watched your battle 14 times. We still do not understand how you survived, but we are grateful that you did. Jake gave her a tour of the ship, showing her the damage that repair crews were still fixing from the battle. He watched her run her long fingers over scorched hull plates and melted armor sections, saw the way her scales shifted to darker colors as she absorbed the reality of what combat looked like. When they reached the bridge, Dr. Helen Carter was waiting with displays ready to explain human military history. Helen had spent the last week preparing this presentation, knowing that it would be the first of many. She had pulled footage from Earth's bloodiest conflicts, showing the Talrine what humanity considered normal levels of acceptable loss. The first clip was from a siege during one of Earth's ancient wars, where defenders had held a position even as 90% of their forces died. Nira's scales went almost black as she watched. This is not normal behavior. Why did they not surrender when survival became impossible? Because surrender meant everyone died anyway, Helen explained patiently. Humans learned early that some enemies will not show mercy, so we learned to fight until we physically cannot continue. It is not that we are brave. It is that we understand losing can be worse than dying. The Talrine ambassador looked at Jake with something that might have been horror or awe. He couldn't tell which. Your entire species is like this? You all fight this way? Jake thought about the Mars colonists who had fought Earth's military for 3 years despite being outnumbered 10-1. He thought about every underdog victory in human history, every desperate stand that shouldn't have succeeded but did. Not all of us, but enough. When humans are cornered, something happens in our minds. We stop calculating odds and start calculating how much damage we can do before we fall. The Kreth rule through fear and overwhelming force. They have never faced a species that becomes more dangerous when afraid. Nira was silent for a long moment, her scales slowly shifting back to blue as she processed this information. She turned to look out the viewport at her homeworld, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. We could have won our war with the Kreth. We had better ships, more advanced weapons. But when our casualty projections reached 35%, our leaders decided that preserving civilization was more important than victory. We surrendered and accepted Kreth rule because it was the logical choice. Now I wonder if logic failed us. Helen stepped forward and put a hand on the tall alien's arm in a gesture of comfort that seemed universal, despite the differences in their biology. Logic didn't fail you. You made a choice based on the information you had. But now you have new information. Now you know that the Kreth can be beaten if you are willing to pay the price. Over the next 3 weeks, Jake took the Defiance to 4 more worlds, each one home to species that had surrendered to the Kreth at some point in their history. He met with the Vorn, a warrior culture that had given up fighting after a single catastrophic defeat. He spoke with the Kelian, merchants who had calculated that paying tribute was cheaper than war. Everywhere he went, the question was the same. How do humans fight without calculating survival odds? The answer was always uncomfortable for his alien audiences. Humans did calculate odds, but they calculated differently. They asked not can we win, but can we hurt them enough to matter? They planned for victory but prepared for sacrifice. It was a mindset born from thousands of years of warfare against each other, refined through conflicts where surrender had meant extinction or slavery. Lieutenant Sam Foster, the Defiance's intelligence officer, spent his time gathering information about Kreth movements and capabilities. He was a quiet man in his 30s who preferred data to people, and his reports painted a concerning picture. The Kreth were assembling a fleet unlike anything seen in galactic history. 500 warships, including their most powerful dreadnoughts. Captain, they are not making the same mistake twice. This fleet is designed to overwhelm through pure numbers. They are going to hit us with everything they have, and they are going to do it soon. Our intelligence suggests they will strike at Titan's Gate, the main access point between Kreth space and human territory. Jake studied the tactical projections and felt his stomach sink. Titan's Gate was a natural choke point where a stellar phenomenon created navigational hazards that forced ships through a narrow corridor. It was the perfect place to defend, but only if you had enough ships. Current projections showed humanity could muster maybe 20 vessels in time to meet the Kreth assault. How long do we have? 3 weeks, maybe 4. They are doing this fast, trying to hit us before we can build alliances or reinforce our positions. The mission changed after that. Jake sent messages to every species he had visited, explaining that the Kreth were coming and that humanity would make a stand at Titan's Gate, whether anyone joined them or not. The responses came back slowly, each one carefully worded and filled with the same calculation. Was it worth risking their remaining forces to stand with humanity against impossible odds? Ambassador Nira and the Talreen were the first to commit, promising to send 2 ships. The Vorn sent 3. The Keelian sent 1 vessel loaded with advanced sensors and communication equipment. It wasn't enough to match the Kreth fleet, but it was more than Jake had hoped for. 6 alien ships and whatever human forces could reach Titan's Gate in time, against 500 Kreth warships. Back on the Kreth homeworld, Voth watched the reports of human diplomatic activity with growing concern. The humans were building alliances, sharing their strange philosophy of combat with species that had long ago accepted Kreth dominance. Some of those species were now preparing to fight again, inspired by humanity's example. It was exactly what Voth had feared. The humans were spreading their madness like a disease. The fleet was nearly ready, 500 of the most powerful ships in Kreth history. Voth had handpicked the commanders, choosing only those who had never experienced defeat. He had drilled them on human tactics, warned them about humanity's refusal to surrender. They were as prepared as they could be for an enemy that defied logic and mathematics. But Voth had also done something else, something he told no one about. He had studied human history in depth, watching recordings of their wars and reading their military philosophy. He had learned about concepts like acceptable losses, and strategic retreat, and fighting withdrawal, all things that humans practiced but applied differently than other species. And somewhere in all that study, Voth had discovered something that disturbed him deeply. Humans didn't just fight harder when cornered. They fought smarter. Their desperation bred innovation rather than panic. Every time they faced impossible odds, they invented new ways to turn weakness into strength. The Kreth had spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of overwhelming force, but humans had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of surviving overwhelming force. As the fleet prepared to depart for Titan's Gate, Voth stood on the command deck of his flagship and stared at the stars. He had assembled enough firepower to crack a planet. He had planned every detail of the assault. He had prepared his forces for human resistance. But deep in his chest, that uncomfortable feeling of fear remained. The humans would be waiting at Titan's Gate with a fraction of his numbers. And somehow Voth couldn't shake the certainty that this battle would not go the way the mathematics predicted. The fleet launched, 500 ships moving in perfect formation toward the confrontation that would determine the future of the galaxy. Behind them, the Kreth homeworld waited in confident silence. Ahead at Titan's Gate, a handful of ships crewed by humans and their new allies prepared to face an armada with nothing but determination, and the strange human belief that impossible odds were just another challenge to overcome. The stage was set for a battle that would teach the galaxy the true meaning of fear. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried on subspace communication networks that connected thousands of worlds and hundreds of species. The Kreth Collective, undefeated for 3,000 years, had retreated from a single human warship. The message was simple, but its implications were staggering. A new species had arrived in the galaxy and they didn't know how to lose. Gateway Station hung in space like a massive wheel, rotating slowly to provide artificial gravity for the 50,000 souls who called it home. The Defiance drifted toward the docking arms on maneuvering thrusters alone, its main engines too damaged to risk firing. Jake stood on the bridge and watched repair crews swarm over the hull like ants on a carcass, already beginning the work of putting his ship back together. The battle had been 3 days ago, but he could still feel the adrenaline in his veins every time he closed his eyes. Admiral Patricia Cole was waiting for him in the station's command center, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many young officers die under her command. She stood as Jake entered, and he was surprised to see her salute him before gesturing to a chair across from her desk. The salute was unexpected. Admirals didn't usually salute captains unless something significant had changed. "Captain Morrison, you have created quite a situation. Since your battle with the Kreth, we have received first contact requests from 17 different species, alliance offers from 6 more, and 3 separate intelligence reports that the Kreth are preparing a retaliation fleet. You kicked a hornet's nest, and now everyone wants to know what kind of hornets we are." Jake sat down and tried to organize his thoughts. He had spent the last 3 days writing reports and reviewing damage assessments, trying to understand exactly how they had survived. The more he looked at the tactical data, the less sense it made. By every logical measure, the Defiance should have been destroyed in the first 5 minutes of combat. "Admiral, we got lucky. The Kreth fight like they are reading from a playbook written 1,000 years ago. They are powerful and coordinated, but they don't adapt. If they come back with better tactics, I don't know if we can pull off the same trick twice." Patricia leaned back in her chair and studied him with an expression that might have been amusement or concern. He couldn't tell which. She pulled up a holographic display between them that showed a star map with hundreds of markers, indicating the locations of different species and territories. "Captain, you're thinking about this wrong. The Kreth aren't coming back because they learned new tactics. They are coming back because they are terrified. Do you know what the galactic standard is when a battle turns against you? You calculate your probability of victory, and if it drops below 40%, you surrender. Every species out here follows this rule because it makes sense. You preserve your forces, negotiate terms, and live to fight another day. But humans don't do that, do they?" Jake thought about the Mars Rebellion, about Earth history filled with last stands and desperate defenses against overwhelming odds. He thought about every war humanity had ever fought, and realized that surrendering when things looked bad had never been part of how humans approached conflict. They fought harder when cornered, not softer. "No, ma'am. We don't surrender when the odds turn bad. We fight harder." Exactly. And that is what has the entire galaxy talking. The Kreth broadcast your battle across their network as a warning to their own forces. They wanted other Kreth ships to know what they were facing. But every other species intercepted those broadcasts too. Do you understand what you showed them? You showed them that the Kreth can be beaten. The holographic display changed, showing footage from the battle that must have come from Kreth sensors. Jake watched his own ship charge into the enemy formation, saw the moment when the Kreth fleet faltered and broke. He had been too busy fighting to appreciate how it must have looked from the outside. The Defiance had been a wounded animal throwing itself at a superior predator. And somehow that predator had blinked first. "We have already been contacted by the Talreen." Admiral Cole continued, highlighting a section of the star map. "They fought the Kreth 2 centuries ago and lost. They had superior technology and numerical advantage, but they surrendered when their casualty projections reached 35%. The Kreth have ruled them ever since. Now they are asking us how we won. They want to understand why humans don't give up." "What did you tell them?" "That we would send someone to explain." "That someone is you, Captain. I am ordering you to take the Defiance on a diplomatic mission once repairs are complete. I want you to visit the Talreen and any other species willing to stand against the Kreth. Show them what you showed me. That fear is just something you push through to get to victory." Jake wanted to argue that he was a warship captain, not a diplomat, but the words died in his throat. He understood what Patricia was really asking him to do. She wanted him to build an alliance to turn humanity's strange inability to quit into something that could challenge Kreth dominance. It was ambitious and dangerous and probably impossible. Naturally, he heard himself agreeing to do it. Meanwhile, halfway across the galaxy on the Kreth homeworld, Supreme Commander Voth stood in the war room and watched the battle footage for the 100th time. The massive display showed the human vessel charging forward when it should have retreated, absorbing damage that should have destroyed it, fighting with an intensity that defied every tactical doctrine Voth had studied in his 200 years of military service. The council chambers around him were silent as other Kreth commanders watched the footage with him. They had all seen it before, but repetition didn't make it any easier to understand. The human ship had been outnumbered and outgunned. Logic dictated surrender. Mathematics demanded retreat. Yet the humans had done neither, and somehow they had won. "They fight as if death is not a consideration," one of the junior commanders said quietly. "Our ships withdrew when they calculated defeat was probable. The humans calculated that defeat was probable and attacked anyway. How do we fight an enemy that ignores the mathematics of survival? Voth paused the footage at the moment when the Defiance had crashed through the Kreth formation. The human ship was burning, shields nearly collapsed, surrounded by enemies. Any rational commander would have surrendered at that moment. Instead, the humans had opened fire at point-blank range and turned the battle into chaos. "We study them," Voth said finally. "I want every piece of information we can find about human history, human warfare, human psychology. They are not ignoring mathematics. They are using different mathematics than we understand. Find me the formula they are using and we can counter it." But even as he gave the order, Voth felt something he had never experienced before in his long military career. It was an uncomfortable sensation, a tightness in his chest that made his breathing shallow. It took him several moments to identify the feeling, and when he did, it shocked him. He was afraid. The Kreth had ruled through fear for millennia, but they had never felt it themselves. Now, thinking about facing the humans again, Voth understood what their victims had experienced all these years. The footage continued playing automatically, showing the moment when the Kreth fleet had retreated. Voth watched his own ships fleeing from a single damaged human vessel and felt shame mixed with his fear. The galaxy had seen the Kreth run. The aura of invincibility that had been their greatest weapon was cracking. Unless they found a way to defeat the humans decisively, that crack would spread until the entire Kreth collective crumbled. "Assemble the fleet," he ordered. "I want 500 ships ready to move within 2 months. We will return to human space and end this threat before it grows. This time we will not underestimate them. This time we will bring enough force to overwhelm even their strange willingness to die." The commander saluted and began issuing orders, but Voth remained staring at the frozen image of the human ship on the display. He had spent decades conquering species and crushing resistance. He had seen countless enemies surrender when faced with Kreth military might, but something told him that the humans would not surrender. No matter how large the fleet he brought against them, they would fight, and they would die, and they would make the Kreth pay for every meter of space. For the first time in his life, Voth wondered if superior numbers and technology would be enough. The humans had shown him something terrifying, that the will to fight could matter more than the ability to win. As he walked out of the war room to prepare for the coming campaign, Voth couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy was about to change in ways that no one could predict. The age of Kreth dominance was ending, and something new and frightening was rising to take its place, something that called itself humanity. The first volley of Kreth weapons fire hit the Defiance like a hammer striking an anvil, and the entire ship shuddered under the impact. Jake felt the deck plates vibrate beneath his feet as the shields absorbed energy that could have vaporized a city. Warning lights flashed across every console on the bridge, painting the crew in alternating shades of red and amber. The view screen showed a storm of energy beams converging on their position from multiple angles, each one bright enough to leave after images burned into his vision. Shields holding at 73%. Forward armor taking direct hits on decks 5 through 12. Minor hull breaches on deck 8. Emergency bulkheads are sealing. Lisa's voice cut through the chaos with mechanical precision, reporting damage as casually as if she were reading a grocery list. Jake watched her fingers fly across her console, directing power to weakened shield sections and coordinating the Defiance's return fire. She was brilliant under pressure, turning the ship into an extension of her own tactical mind. The Defiance's weapons batteries opened up in response, sending plasma bolts and missiles streaking toward the nearest Kreth vessels. The heavy cannons mounted along the ship's spine roared to life, each shot powerful enough to crack a planet's crust. Jake saw one of his missiles connect with a Kreth destroyer, and for a moment he felt hope rise in his chest. Then the smoke cleared and the enemy ship was still there, its shields barely dimmed by the impact. Danny's voice crackled over the internal communication system from the engineering deck, competing with alarms and the sound of systems overloading. "Captain, I am pushing the reactors to 115%. I can give you maybe 20 minutes at this output before things start melting down here. Whatever you are going to do, do it fast." Jake acknowledged the engineer with a quick response and turned his attention back to the battle. The Kreth ships were surrounding them in a perfect formation, their movements coordinated with mathematical precision. Every shot they fired was calculated to maximize damage while minimizing their own exposure. It was textbook strategy, the kind of fighting that came from centuries of experience and countless victories. They expected the Defiance to retreat or surrender once the shields failed. They expected rational behavior from an outmatched opponent. They were about to learn that humans weren't always rational when cornered. "Lisa, what do you see? Give me something I can use." She was silent for a moment, her eyes moving rapidly across multiple displays as she analyzed the Kreth attack patterns. Jake had learned to trust these silences, knew she was processing information faster than he could follow. When she finally spoke, there was an edge of excitement in her voice that made him lean forward. "Captain, they are fighting by the book. Every maneuver follows a logical progression. They concentrate fire on our weakest shield sections and withdraw when we return fire. They are trying to wear us down methodically. But there is something else. They have never fought anyone who fights back like we do. Watch how they react when we push forward instead of retreating." Jake saw it then, the pattern she had identified. When the Defiance returned fire, the Kreth ships pulled back into defensive positions, waiting for the logical response of a damaged vessel trying to flee. When that retreat didn't come, there was a moment of hesitation in their formations, a brief pause while they recalculated their approach. It was only a fraction of a second, but in combat that was an eternity. "Kevin, on my mark, I want you to push us forward at full speed directly into the center of their formation. I don't care what is in the way, you go through it. Danny, transfer all shield power to the forward generators. Nothing behind us matters if we don't survive the next 2 minutes. Captain, that is suicide. We will be surrounded with no retreat options." Lisa's objection was immediate and based on sound tactical doctrine. Going deeper into an enemy formation when outnumbered was exactly what every military manual said not to do. Jake turned to look at her and saw the concern in her eyes, but also the beginning of understanding. She was starting to see what he was planning. "Trust me, Lisa. These people have won every battle they have ever fought because their enemies were smart enough to retreat when outmatched. We are going to do something incredibly stupid and they won't know how to respond. Kevin, execute on my mark." The young helmsman's hands hovered over his controls and Jake could see the fear in the way his shoulders tensed. But Kevin didn't question the order. He had seen enough in his short career to know that sometimes surviving meant doing the last thing your enemy expected. Mark. The Defiance's engines roared to full power and the massive battleship lurched forward like a predator breaking into a sprint. The acceleration pressed Jake back into his chair as they charged directly toward the center of the Kreth formation. Enemy fire intensified, dozens of ships concentrating their weapons on the human vessel that was behaving in a way that made no tactical sense. The forward shields glowed white-hot under the assault, energy readings climbing into critical levels. They punched through the first line of Kreth vessels before the aliens could adjust their formation. Jake watched on the view screen as a Kreth destroyer tried to move into their path. But Kevin was faster. The young pilot sent the Defiance into a roll that would have torn a smaller ship apart, and they scraped past the enemy vessel with less than 50 meters of clearance. The Defiance's hull armor screamed as it made contact, ripping a gash along the Kreth ship's side and sending it spinning out of control. Weapons Officer Amy Price, who had been silent up until now, suddenly called out targeting solutions with rapid-fire precision. She had seen the opportunity that Jake's maneuver had created. The Kreth ships were now in each other's firing lines, unable to shoot at the Defiance without risking hits on their own vessels. "Captain, I have clear shots on 3 command ships. Their shields are angled wrong for close-range combat. Requesting permission to fire everything we have." "Do it." The Defiance's entire weapons array fired simultaneously at point-blank range. Plasma cannons, missile tubes, and the experimental particle beam all unleashed their fury on targets that were too close to evade. The first Kreth command ship's shields collapsed under the barrage, and the follow-up shots tore through its hull like paper. Secondary explosions rippled along its length as internal systems overloaded. The second command ship tried to turn, but Amy had predicted the maneuver and her missiles caught it broadside. The third ship managed to raise emergency shields, but the particle beam punched through them and cored the vessel from bow to stern. The space around them filled with debris and the expanding clouds of gas from destroyed reactors. The Kreth formation was breaking apart, ships pulling back in confusion as their command structure dissolved. Jake could see it on the tactical display, the moment when discipline gave way to uncertainty. They had never experienced this before, never faced an enemy that treated overwhelming odds as just another problem to solve with violence and determination. "Kevin, get us out of the debris field before they reorganize. Lisa, give me a damage report." Shields are down to 28%. We have lost 6 weapons batteries and the port missile tubes are offline. Hull breaches on 15 decks. Casualties coming in from all sections. But Captain, we just destroyed 3 of their command ships and damaged 4 others. They are retreating. Jake watched the view screen as the remaining Kreth vessels pulled back into a defensive formation, well out of weapons range. They were broadcasting something on multiple frequencies, likely warning other Kreth forces about what they had just encountered. The Defiance hung in space, battered and burning, but still functional. Around them floated the wreckage of Kreth ships that had thought victory was inevitable. Set course for Gateway Station. We need repairs and we need to get word to Fleet Command about what just happened. And someone find out if any of the research station crew survived in escape pods. The bridge crew moved to execute his orders, but Jake could see the way they moved differently now. They had faced impossible odds and survived. They had fought an enemy that the galaxy feared and sent them running. As the Defiance limped away from the battlefield, Jake wondered what would happen when the Kreth told their story to the rest of the galaxy. What would happen when everyone learned that humanity didn't understand the meaning of surrender? He suspected they were about to find out, and the answer would change everything. The galaxy claimed it knew fear until it met a human battleship captain, Jake. Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance and watched the stars drift past the view screen like distant fireflies in an endless night. He had been out here for 6 months now, patrolling the outer edges of human space where civilization ended and the unknown began. The Defiance was a monster of a ship, stretching over 2 kilometers from bow to stern, bristling with weapons that could crack a moon in half. Jake had commanded smaller vessels before, but nothing like this. This was humanity's answer to the question of what lurked in the dark between stars. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant sat at the tactical station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed the surrounding space in perfect detail. She was younger than Jake by 15 years, but she had a mind that could calculate battle scenarios faster than the ship's computer. Jake trusted her completely, which was rare for him. Trust had to be earned in the void, where one mistake could kill everyone aboard. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of systems and the occasional beep of a sensor reading. Chief Engineer Danny Torres was below decks, probably cursing at some piece of equipment that refused to work the way it was designed. Dr. Helen Carter was in her lab, studying samples from the last planetary survey. Everything was routine, which made Jake nervous. He had learned long ago that routine was when trouble liked to show up unannounced. The communication console chirped, breaking the silence. Ensign Kevin Blake, barely 23 and fresh from the academy, straightened in his chair. His hands moved quickly across his station before he turned to face Jake with wide eyes that hadn't yet learned to hide surprise. Captain Morrison, we are receiving a distress signal from Research Station Theta 7. They are reporting an attack and requesting immediate assistance. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Theta 7 was a civilian station, home to about 200 scientists studying nebula formations near the edge of explored space. It was supposed to be safe out here, far from any known threats. He moved to stand behind Lisa's station and watched as she pulled up the station's location on her display. How far, Lisa? 3 hours at maximum speed. The signal is breaking up badly. I am detecting massive energy signatures near the station's coordinates. Jake didn't hesitate. Kevin, set course for Theta 7 and push the engines as hard as Danny will let you. Lisa, wake up the crew and get everyone to battle stations. I want weapons hot and shields ready the moment we drop out of faster-than-light travel. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as everyone moved to execute his orders. Jake returned to his command chair and strapped himself in, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like a heavy coat. He had sent the message to Fleet Command, but he knew they were too far away to help. Whatever was happening at Theta 7, the Defiance would face it alone. The 3 hours passed in tense silence as the ship hurtled through space at speeds that bent reality around them. Jake spent the time reviewing everything they knew about the region, which wasn't much. No hostile species had ever been encountered this far out. No pirates operated in areas where there was nothing to steal. Whatever attacked the station was something new, something unknown. When they finally dropped back into normal space near Theta 7, the view screen filled with a sight that made Jake's blood run cold. The research station was gone, reduced to a field of twisted metal and frozen bodies that tumbled through the void like leaves in a winter wind. But that wasn't what held his attention. Surrounding the debris were ships, dozens of them, each one larger than the Defiance and built with a grace that spoke of technology far beyond anything humanity had achieved. Captain, I am reading 47 vessels of unknown design. They are positioned in a standard blockade formation around the station remains. Energy signatures indicate active weapons and defensive systems. Lisa's voice was steady, but Jake could hear the tension underneath. He studied the alien ships on the view screen and felt something cold settle in his chest. These weren't explorers or traders. These were warships, and they had just destroyed a civilian station full of unarmed scientists. Open a channel on all frequencies. Let's see if they want to talk before we start shooting. Kevin worked his console for a moment before nodding. Channel open, sir. Jake stood and faced the view screen, knowing that somewhere on those alien ships someone was watching him right now. He kept his voice calm and formal, the way first contact protocols demanded. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Space Force vessel Defiance. You have attacked a civilian research station under human protection. I am requesting an explanation and demanding that you withdraw from this area immediately. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the view screen flickered and changed, showing the interior of one of the alien ships. The being that appeared was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished stone and eyes that burned with a cold intelligence. When it spoke, the translator made its voice sound smooth and emotionless. I am Ambassador Vale of the Kreth Collective. We have claimed this region of space as ours by right of superior strength. Your presence here is unlawful. You will surrender your vessel and submit to Kreth authority. Resistance will result in your destruction. Jake felt anger rise in his throat like bile, but he forced it down. Getting emotional wouldn't help anyone. He glanced at Lisa, who was rapidly analyzing the alien vessels, then back at the screen. We don't recognize your authority over this space. These are human territories, and that station was full of innocent people. You murdered them. We don't surrender to murderers. The alien's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those strange eyes. Surprise maybe, or confusion. Ambassador Vale tilted his head slightly as if trying to understand a concept that made no sense. You are one vessel against 47. The logical choice is surrender. Fighting would result in certain destruction. Why do you choose death over submission? Jake felt a grim smile tug at the corner of his mouth. He had heard that question before, back during the Mars Rebellion when Earth forces had tried to crush the colonies. The answer had been the same then as it was now. Because we are human, and humans don't give up just because the odds are bad. Lisa, are those weapons charged? All batteries ready, Captain. I have targeting solutions on the nearest 12 vessels. Jake sat back down in his command chair and met the alien's gaze through the view screen. He could see confusion spreading across Vale's face, as if the concept of fighting against impossible odds was something completely foreign to the Kreth. Ambassador Vale, you murdered innocent people. You threatened my crew. You gave me an ultimatum. Here is mine. Leave now, or learn what happens when you corner a human with nothing left to lose. The view screen went dark as the Kreth cut the connection. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then every alien ship powered up their weapons simultaneously, and the space around the Defiance lit up like a second sun as energy beams lanced through the darkness toward the human battleship. Jake gripped the arms of his chair and gave the only order that made sense. All weapons, fire at will. Show them what fear really means. The battle had begun, and the galaxy was about to learn that humanity had brought something new to the stars. The willingness to fight even when victory seemed impossible.